Hannah, is that you? There's a huge search for you. Is this really you? Hannah on camera looks at him and says, "No, I'm not Hannah." And she ups and walks away. The captain of the Staten Island ferry in New York City was looking out at the water just south of Manhattan, and he noticed something bobbing in the water. And he said that it just didn't look right. So they hopped in a skiff, they drove over, and very quickly they saw that it was actually a woman, and her face was in the water. So as soon as they pulled up alongside her, the first thing they did is grabbed her head and kind of pulled it out of the water. And to their surprise, she gasped for air. They pulled her up into the skiff. She had on just running shorts and a sports bra. She had a very bad sunburn on one side of her body. She was hypothermic. She was dehydrated, and she looked like she had been in the water for a very long time. They bring her back to the ferry. They wrap her up in a blanket and they call 911, and an ambulance is immediately sent out to go get her. As they're waiting for the ambulance, she starts to speak. "I was just out for a run. I went running just a couple hours ago. Why am I here?" They chalked it up to her being in shock. Finally, when she was able to confirm that she was in fact Hannah Up, and they got in touch with her family, investigators were baffled because Hannah Up had been missing for 3 weeks, not one day. When they said this to Hannah, she couldn't believe it. At first, everyone was okay with Hannah not being able to remember because she just went through something traumatic. But as time went on, it became clear that Hannah had absolutely no clue what happened over a 3-week period that she had been missing. 3 weeks before she was found, she had left her apartment in New York City to go for a run. When Hannah did not return to her apartment that night, her roommates actually didn't think much of it. 4 days would go by before Hannah's roommates would notice that she still hasn't come back. So the first thing they did is they went into her bedroom inside of the apartment, and they quickly were able to find that her passport was in there, her wallet with her cash, bank cards, her ID. Basically, all of the most important items that you would carry with you anywhere you went were sitting in her room. At this point, they called the police, and a massive search is ignited for this woman. And after a week, the family and friends were starting to lose hope, and the police would admit that at that point, they were just looking for a body. They assumed that she had been the victim of some horrible crime. Then there was this huge break in the case because there was an Apple store in Midtown Manhattan that spotted her clearly entering their store and logging into one of their computers. They saw that she logged in with her email address, and oddly enough, one of the people that went to school with her approached her and was like, "Hannah? Hannah, is that you? There's a huge search for you. Is this really you?" Hannah on camera looks at him and says, "No, I'm not Hannah." And she ups and walks away. Police show up. There's no sign of Hannah. She's gone. Police took the footage and showed it to Hannah's mother, and she recognized her 100%. That is Hannah. But no one could understand, why would she deny being Hannah? Is she being held hostage? A day later, she popped up on the security camera at a Starbucks in Manhattan. But just like the Apple store, by the time the report got to the police and they went to the Starbucks, she was gone. Same thing happened at a number of Manhattan gyms where she was apparently going and using their shower and then leaving. And again, every time police showed up, she'd be gone. And there's lots of other unanswered questions. How are you able to do anything? You don't have your license, you don't have your wallet, you don't have bank cards, you don't have a passport. We don't know where you're sleeping, where you're staying. How are you eating? What are you doing? Where are you coming from? What's wrong? While police were never able to determine where she had been sleeping at night in those first couple of weeks, they did determine that at some point towards the end of this 3-week period, she decided to leave Manhattan. And so she jumped into a kayak off of Chelsea Pier and began paddling south. And at some point, we don't know when, she jumped out of the kayak and began swimming south. And after several hours of swimming, she wound up at Robbins Reef, which is this incredibly isolated lighthouse that sits on this tiny little rocky island. She managed to pull herself up onto the island and then sat there on these rocks for almost 24 hours. Then some event led to her getting back in the water and kind of bobbing and drifting her way all the way back over to the south side of Manhattan, where she was ultimately spotted and then rescued by the ferry captain. It took police and investigators quite a bit of time to put together this storyline of what happened to Hannah over those 3 weeks. And when they brought it to her and her family and said, "This is what we think happened to you," she still had no idea how any of this had happened. She thought she'd gone running, and then the same day she wound up in the water and was being rescued. While she was at the hospital, she had undergone a series of brain imaging tests to try to see what they could find, if there was some underlying neurological condition that might have caused her to forget this huge chunk of time. But the tests revealed no neurological issues. They concluded that the episode was psychological in nature. Fast forward almost exactly 5 years to September of 2013, and now Hannah is living in Maryland. She's an assistant teacher at a Montessori school, and Hannah goes missing again. On the day she went missing, co-workers claimed to have seen her just a couple miles away from the school, and they assumed that she was walking to work. But she didn't show up for work that day, and when they tried calling her, she didn't pick up. They went to her apartment, she wasn't there, and so just like 5 years earlier, they called the police and they launched a search for Hannah up. Early on in the search, police located Hannah's phone and wallet sitting on a walking path relatively close to where she worked. But they started searching the area and they could not find her. 2 days after the search started, Hannah's mother received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. When she picked it up, it was her daughter. And she said, "I don't know where I am, I don't know what's going on, but I'm okay." Hannah had regained her memory while laying in a creek bed next to a turned over shopping cart in some random park in Maryland, not the one where her phone and wallet were found. She had stood up, had no idea how she got there, and she flagged down a stranger and asked to use their phone and was able to call her mother. Her family, her friends, the police were all so relieved that she was found and unharmed that, much like the last one, she ultimately was released from the hospital because she wasn't hurt and was able to more or less move back into a normal life. Except Hannah at this point felt really guilty. She didn't understand why this was happening, but she felt really bad about it, and it was clear to her family and friends that she really wished she could somehow have a do-over, to just start fresh and start a new life where no one knew her as this person who keeps disappearing. A year after the Maryland incident, Hannah would move to the US Virgin Islands, a popular location for Americans that want to start again or go off the grid. She was able to land a job teaching at a Montessori school teaching 3 to 6-year-old children, and the director of the program would say that whenever they brought a family on a tour of the different classrooms, Hannah's classroom was always the first one they went to because she was such a great example of what children would expect if they came to this Montessori school. But in September 2017, 9 years after her disappearance in New York and 4 years after her disappearance in Maryland, Hannah would go missing for a third time. Now, the lead up to this disappearance is a little bit unique relative to the other two. Right before she disappeared, there was a Category 5 hurricane barreling down on the Virgin Islands, and all of Hannah's friends, colleagues, everyone she knew was scrambling to leave the islands before it hit. But Hannah was not prepared to abandon the island and abandon her house and her school, and so she decides to stay behind. In the final few days before all of her friends and colleagues left the island, they described Hannah as being in some sort of a trance. She was hard to get through to, hard to speak to, but she seemed rather sing-songy, like she was in a really good mood, but very difficult to communicate with. On September 15th, just a few days before the hurricane would actually make landfall, the few staff members at the Montessori school who had stayed behind on the island to weather the storm called a meeting, and Hannah was not present. She was last seen preparing her Montessori classroom for the imminent impact of the hurricane. When they went to her apartment, she wasn't there, and so they went out looking for her. One of her friends knew that a favorite location of Hannah's was Sapphire Beach, and when she got there, sure enough, there was Hannah's car parked in the parking lot with her purse, passport, and hundreds of dollars inside of her car. Hannah's clothes were found down on the beach on a chair, neatly folded, but there was no sign of Hannah anywhere. A desperate search for Hannah was launched, led by the Coast Guard, but it had to be abandoned after only a couple of days because the hurricane was barreling down on them. And to this day, she has never been seen or heard from again. After Hannah was scooped up by the ferry captain and brought to the hospital after that first disappearance in 2008, they ran all those brain tests and they discovered that there was nothing wrong with her from a neurological standpoint. However, they did run a series of psychological tests and they discovered that she had an extremely rare form of amnesia called dissociative fugue. For those that suffer it, there are no symptoms leading up to it, and then all of a sudden you forget all of your autobiographical information, but you don't forget how to live. Someone in a fugue state could very easily leave their apartment, go to a store, interact with other people. They just don't understand who they are. They don't know their name. They don't know their history. They don't know why they are located where they are. This can last for a couple of hours, all the way to years. Now, the tricky part is, in 2017, when she went missing, it would be very easy to say that she was in a fugue state because it had already happened 2 times before. However, other people believe that she just wanted to start her life over again. She hated being known only for her 2 disappearances. She wanted to be known as a happy, loving person, a great teacher, a great friend. And none of that was possible with her history. And so some say that she staged the last disappearance because she knew with the hurricane coming in that she would be able to kind of disappear without a trace and people would assume that she was probably dead.